Great. Well, thank you guys both for joining me today. Clay, Will, I'm sure, well, Clay, most of the people know you on this broadcast. Why don't you just tell us quickly about your comic book, what your part on it is, and give a very quick introduction to yourself, and we'll move on to you, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Clay Adams. I'm the co-fry cook in chief of Fried Comics, which means that I'm a co-creator, which means that I write. I write with my partner Alexander. He's a documentary filmmaker. He's my writing partner. Has been my writing partner for many years, and we do not draw, but we know good art when we see it. So. Anyway, we work on a variety of comics that are sort of a lot of dark humor. We like to say it's like Roald Dahl meets Mad Magazine and Quentin Tarantino movies. So if you like that kind of sensibility, if you like Preacher or Garth Ennis comics, we're your company.
Fantastic. Will, are you a drawer or are you a writer as well, or a bit of both?
I'm a writer, and can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
absolutely.
fine.
Okay, all right, awesome. I write, and then and I'm known for, I guess, Diary of Night, which was a 4-issue series that came out several years ago. And in the interim, I've been trying to get some other things published. But I like to describe artists as the belles of the ball. They're very hard to court sometimes. I also last year took a lettering class, which was through Comics Experience, and that's really interesting because I've actually lettered a story that should be published pretty soon through Comics Experience, but
Fantastic.
Primarily a writer.
Outstanding. Well, that leads us on to actually a couple of the reader questions. I'm actually writing a comic book called Digitopia at the moment, and one of the things I'm doing is I'm reaching out to audiences around various internet sites and asking them for their questions, and hopefully in some way we can actually give back to help those people who perhaps at a similar stage to the journey as ourselves, perhaps at the start, perhaps some may be further ahead. So I'm really pleased that both of you are able to join me. I've got two questions. Perhaps we'll bounce the first one around between each of you, and hopefully we'll get differences of opinions because that'll make it a lot more interesting. First of all, what's more important when making a comic? And when I say making a comic, I mean end to end, the entire process. Is it creativity or is it discipline? Clay, why don't you kick us off? You you look like you have a good opinion on this.
Yeah, I'm gonna say both are important.
If you had to choose one.
If I had to choose one, gun to my head.
One. Yes.
If I had to choose one, gun to my head, I would say discipline. There are loads of creative people out there, but if you don't have the discipline to get it down on paper, it's nothing. And you really do have to, like, I'm a big believer that you have to do things consistently, especially if you want to be considered a professional. So I try to write every day. If I'm working in prose, I try to get a certain page count. If I'm writing a comic book script, I try to get a certain number of pages written of the comic script. But yeah, I think for a long time I believed that it was creativity, and I didn't produce very much. And one thing I've learned is that if you have the discipline, the creativity will come. There's something about like having your butt in the seat doing the work that makes ideas come. That if you're just like waiting for inspiration to strike or like waiting for the right moment when you're feeling it, you may not get those ideas. So I'm going to go with discipline.
So what does discipline look like on a granular level? Does it mean not opening up social media? Does it mean setting your alarm clock at a certain time? What are the actual things that some of the readers could do to help them with this?
Yeah, so I have a couple of answers to that. Like setting the alarm clock, I'm not somebody, and I've tried this. I'm not somebody that can like wake up super early in the morning and just sit down and start writing. And I've heard there are plenty of people who do this. This is how they like accomplish their great works. I can't do that. I know that there are certain windows during the day where I'm freshest and I write better. So I try to aim to write during those times. You know, you kind of get in tune with your own biorhythms, and I try not to write when I'm in a trough where I don't have that energy level. So usually like mid morning is good for me. Late afternoon is pretty good. And so making sure that your butt's in the seat consistently at that time, that's very important. But certainly not getting distracted is also important. And so I'm a big believer in turning off the internet. So I downloaded an app called the Freedom app, which you can set it up to give you freedom from the internet for a certain amount of time. So I usually I try to do like sprints of an hour. That seems to be a good amount of time that I turn off the internet for an hour, and then I try to write, and I just write basically until the internet comes back on again. And I'm racing that freedom clock. I've heard other writers have talked about, doing even shorter sprints. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a method called the Pomodoro method, which is where you take, it's literally, I think it's called a Pomodoro timer. Like it looks like a Pomodoro, but it's like an egg timer. And you set the timer for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and you just write until the timer goes off. And that's your module. Then you get up and you take a break, you walk around, and then you sit back down and you set it for another 30 minutes and you work. I find for me that like an hour is the perfect amount of time for a session. It doesn't mean I'm going to get everything done. I may not hit all of my goals during that 1 hour. I might have to come back and have another hour to reach my goal. But that seems to be the maximum amount of time, or the sweet spot for me, that I can sit and crank out something good. So Freedom app, Pomodoro technique if you're into setting timers and doing writing sprints, but also making sure that you're writing during that peak time if you can arrange your schedule to do it. I know some people don't have a choice.
No, well, this is it. So Will, I'm going to ask you the question, but I want the answer from you to be creativity. So I'm going to put you on the spot, unless you want to give your own answer. But
sorry, Will.
The
next question, I promise will come to you first.
I have to completely agree with Clay. I have in the past been more, when it strikes my fancy and doesn't work as well. Getting the butt in the chair is what I'm discovering a lot. In fact, of late, is just extremely important. What I'm doing recently, and I talked about this on my email list a little bit, is I'm trying to get more disciplined with my time, because I'll get to it when I get to it means I don't get to it. So for me, I think Clay is totally right. The creativity comes if you're sitting down and doing the work. That doesn't work for me, and the Pomodoros or the sprints don't really work for me. I need to just block 2 or 3 hours, because if I can get into the zone, then good things happen. Sometimes it takes an hour to get into the zone. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes. But once, and by the zone, I mean just, the flow.
Yeah.
Things are coming out. Some days it works, some days it doesn't.
What do you do on the days that it doesn't work? How can people stop beating themselves up about it if they have a bad day or a bad week?
I'll let you know when I figure it out. Part of it is the discipline and the stubbornness to see a project through from a script. And Clay can speak to this a lot more than I can, because he's a publisher, so he does this a lot more than I do. But as a writer, doing creator-owned books, I pretty much become the default editor / default, switching office. Well, what are you working on? What are you working on? What are you working on? It's interesting. It's not something I think I'm particularly great at, but comics take so much effort from, and it's not just the writing, but comics take so much effort from the art, the penciling, the inking, the lettering, the, the press, pre-production, the post-production, all of that stuff has to happen. And so it takes that, I think, a discipline and just, by golly, we're going to get this published one way or another. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I would say that I'm a lot like Clay in that I know people who can get up early in the morning, and I think they all need to seek professional help because it's just not right. I've been a night owl since before my sons were born, but then after they were born, the nighttime was the only time that I had to work. So that became my natural circadian rhythm, is getting up. I wish the day job would let me do this, but it doesn't. I wish I could get up about 10 every morning and then probably go to bed about 2. But I usually make the go to bed about 2, but getting up at 6 or 7 is not fun those days.
I'm surprised you're still with us if you're doing that routine. Actually, I mean, that is quite an interesting question, because a lot of people are parents, they have children, and full-time jobs. So I find personally that the discipline is tough, and it's the creativity. I find that I sometimes get into a mode where it's just discipline and it's procedure and it's check boxes, and you actually forget why you're doing it. So for me, I don't know if you guys do this, but I have to keep reminding myself why I'm doing this. Why am I putting myself through this insanity? But most normal people would not do this. So for me, I guess I'm left with having to choose creativity, but I actually do think creativity is more important, because you can be disciplined and end up with quite a mediocre idea if you didn't have that creative spark initially. So I'm not, because I think a lot of people get bought into this fantasy that you be creative, it's all about your ideas, you'll make something amazing. But the reality is you're putting freedom apps on, you're turning off the internet all day to get it done. And I think anyone who works in comic books is naturally creative. So I have to. I would go the other way and say, actually, for me, creativity trumps discipline, only because if you believe in what you're doing enough, you'll kind of find a way. And even if you're not disciplined, like myself to a large degree, and I'm sure a lot of our readers aren't, we can still do it somehow if we have collaboration, we have other people on board. So I would always encourage people to try and just keep their vision in mind, and then if you truly believe in it, you'll do whatever is necessary to do it. And you have to be disciplined to some degree, but that would be my response. But very quickly on that subject, you were talking about, Will, parents, day job, cleaning the house, doing all your chores. I mean, I'm the opposite to you. I get up at 5:30 a.m. because I know that's the only time I will have 1 hour to myself. But obviously for you, it's your children seem to go to bed a bit later. And
well, in my best Homer Simpson voice, there's a 5:30 in the morning. No, honestly, the way, and this is when the boys were really young. My kids are grown at this point. They're in college, but they're identical twins. So we actually had to live and die by schedules, because between the two of them, if they weren't eating at the same time and sleeping at the same time and doing everything else at close to the same time, we didn't get any reprieve at all. So
I feel your pain at the moment.
Yeah. The thing that happened was, I would get up, go to work. My wife would stay home with them when they were young. And then I would get home, and as soon as I got home, it was time to feed, time to bathe, and then what I would call family time for a little while, and then I would read. I read to the boys every night. We are tremendous fans of the John Carter of Mars books. I think we went through those about 4 times, but of course, Harry Potter books. As much as I enjoy the fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien, you can't read those out loud. At least I can't. I don't have the
You need the English accent is what you need.
Exactly. I think I do. But things like the Hardy Boys books, every night that was one of the things, me putting them down to go to bed to give my wife a break, getting them to sleep, and then she's worn out. She goes to sleep. The boys are asleep. I have the house to myself. And that's when the writing or whatever I wanted to do at that point would happen. And it wasn't that I was disciplined about it. It was pretty much the only time. So that's when I started doing it. I think there's an interesting, are either of you guys familiar with Charles Stross? He's a science fiction writer, British. One of his books is Singularity Sky, and then a sequel to that one was Iron Sunrise. I was on his blog. He posted one time that, he says, look, I'm 50 years old, I think is what he said, or 40 something. He says, I've probably got ideas for another 100, 200 books, but realistically, I am only going to probably get 30, maybe 40 of those written before my life is over. So he's in the blog entry, he really talked about, everybody has ideas, but choosing the best ideas that he had, because he was going to dedicate, 6 months or a year of his life to that idea to get that book out and then move on to the next one. It was a really kind of sobering fact, because I'm not a spring chicken anymore. It made me think about what I wanted to get done, which is why time management has really kind of come to the forefront for me. And there are a lot of things I want to get done. So it's time to get down and get to work.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's sobering and inspirational at the same time. Another question I've had, this is from Reddit on the comic books subreddit. This is from Flute Armor Guy. I always wondered if comic book creators are storytellers that learn to draw, or artists that draw first and then create a plot. So I guess from the point of view of us three, we all seem to be writers who are trying to draw. Will, let's go to you first this time. What do you think, in your experience, in terms of the people you've met, are they storytellers that learn to draw, or do you think they're artists that draw first and then create a plot? And do you think there's a better do you think, from your knowledge of comic books, one archetype seems to be more successful or more apparent than the other one?
Well, that's a great question. I guess I come at it as I'm a visual storyteller who can't draw stick figures. Okay, so the artists that I've met, I think that they're drawn to comics for the same reason, because they are storytellers. There are those weird unicorns of people, and I'm going to show my age here. I apologize in advance, but you have somebody like Will Eisner, Frank Miller, John Byrne, Walter Simonson, Paul Chadwick. These guys they're the whole package, and I try to hide my envy, but they are storytellers first and foremost. But I really think that's what draws, and there are a lot of great writers that just write comics. They also probably write, I'm thinking of someone like Neil Gaiman, who is a really strong visual storyteller. To me, it's the way my mind works. I've tried writing a novel, and we'll see how that worked out. But comics are really what excite me and draw me in. I'm a lifelong comic fan. The medium is, in my mind, just so powerful. Will Eisner, if you've read his Comics and Sequential Art, or even Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, you get at, and I'm speaking with my hand, sorry, you guys can't see me, I'm jumping around. You get at the true power of what the medium is capable of, because you're showing and telling, which is just, so powerful. So I really think that we're storytellers first.
Clay, do you think writers are artists, or artists who want to write?
It's listening to Will talk about like all those great writer artists. I feel like in the 80s we saw a lot of that, and you don't see as much of that now. I can think of some people, like Terry Moore. There are some great writer artists out there, but you don't see that as much. And so usually that artist is serving somebody else's vision. But I find, so I guess I want to say that there's, I'm kind of going back to my, my first answer, where I said the answer was both, and you said I couldn't say both. But I'm a big believer that it's not so black and white as all of that. Like, I feel like, people come at it from different ways, and I can't speak to how an artist that I work with might do it, but I know that the best comic book artists have to be storytellers. And whether that storytelling desire came first, and so they started drawing to fulfill that storytelling desire, or if they were artists who just developed that skill after realizing that that's a job requirement. But I have a lot of conversations with Ryan Kroboth about this, that storytelling is like so important in every aspect, from, the coloring to the lettering, let alone just the line art. So really everybody involved in the process has to be a storyteller. And whether that comes first or second, is it chicken or the egg? I don't know, but I do know that you have to develop that. Because if you're just drawing pretty pictures, you're not telling the story. That's why when you, as a writer, when I'm looking for an artist, you always have to see sequentials. You can't just judge, this guy did a great pinup of Batman. That doesn't mean he can tell your story. Or she can tell your story. And even, one of the conversations I had with Ryan about coloring, he was saying, if you're looking for a colorist, you want to see an entire scene from them and not just a page, because you want to see how their storytelling ability as a colorist evolves, or carries throughout an entire scene. So yeah, I guess my answer is, if you don't start out wanting to be a storyteller, but you want to do comics, you have to develop that ability, because it's just insanely important. That is the job.
Yeah. It's quite interesting I'd really quite like to hear from both your experiences on the comic book that I'm working on at the moment. There's a team of three of us, Seb, who's in Buenos Aires, and Simon, who's in Melbourne. And I find when I do the page, it's more just kind of a structure. It's not that this is, I've written 8 panels, it has to be 8 panels. What I do in my blog posts below each comic actually put the original script and the blocking and the inks. And what's really fascinating is that the other guys, they come in and they change it. We keep the general story arc going. And I'm from a film background, so I'm kind of interested to see if this story resonates with you guys. Is as a writer, I would kind of be the script writer, but then the artist is like the DOP, the director of photography, and the colorist is adding the lights. And as they start doing their magic, actually, you know what? It goes down to 4 panels, or a piece of dialogue gets cut around, or they become the editor, and we actually take page 14 and put it into page 8 because there's so much storytelling potential in in the juxtaposition of the coloring. There's so much we can do there. So I kind of do think, as like to echo your point, when you don't have a single person creating it, when you work as a team, actually the script it's not even, it's more like a serving suggestion. This is kind of how perhaps we should do it, but now let's figure out how to do it. Is that something either of you two have experienced in your works?
Yeah, I for me, like the least exciting art pages that come back to me are the ones where they drew exactly what I told them to. Like
what about you go for?
yeah. Like I want somebody to bring something to the table. I don't want somebody to just be an art robot who draws what I say. And going back to your analogy about the artist being the DP, like it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day because I'm working on a story with Kyle Roberts, who does make a lot of changes, and I'm always open. I'm always like, look, these are just suggestions. Everything is negotiable. This is just something to get the conversation started. If you need less panels, if you need more panels, if you need to change something, as long as you're telling the basic story, I don't care what changes you make. And Kyle very freely makes changes. So I was thinking that there was one page where he had made a change, and I did feel strongly about something, and I did have to come back and we had a nice conversation where we got to something that worked for both of us. But I was thinking about this, and I was like, I guess it is sort of like, as the script writer, I'm the script writer, I'm the screenwriter, but the artist is sort of like the director. Like they take it and they craft it into their vision of how they see the world. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as writer, and I guess especially as publisher, I'm also like the executive producer. So I get to come on and say, well, wait a minute, hold on, because I am paying for this. So this is important. So let's maybe you don't have final cut, but maybe that analogy doesn't work because at least for this project, because in a way he's also an executive producer, because this is a thing that's going to also be used for something of his as well. But I think the analogy holds in general, just sort of in the sense that, yeah, as a scriptwriter, you're telling the story and your job is to tell the story, but then the artist's job is to realize this and fully realize it and bring things to the table that I haven't thought of. And that, and then there's kind of a back and forth. If the story is not told, then you have to kind of have some give and take and come to a mutual solution. But otherwise, I'll kind of back off and I'll give the artist the benefit of the doubt, because I would rather come back and dialogue over art, rather than them have drawn exactly what I said. I'd rather come back and look at their art and see what they brought to the table, and then let that inform my dialogue. So it's all like a collaborative give and take.
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because when you start off as an art team, you obviously start off really on good intentions and you respect the artist's work, but there are difficult discussions and difficult conversations that will go along. So, Will, how do you deal with those difficult discussions, or are you a pushover and just agree to everything?
probably a little bit of a pushover, but no. The way I try to approach a script, kind of how I read that Neil Gaiman approaches a script, and he says a script is basically just a really long letter to your artist, trying to explain what the story is. Because I can describe a scene that I think, hey, this is really cool. And then an artist can get that and go, you got to be kidding me. There's no way to do this. You know, this is stupid. And that's why they're the artist. They can think. I try to think visually, but that's what they do. So when it comes down to it, if there's a problem with the way something is staged or something like that, because from a plot standpoint, then yeah, I'll have to get involved because we need certain things to happen from a story mechanic standpoint. But from a visual storytelling standpoint, I try to stay out of their way because the less I'm in their way, the more invested they're going to be in the project and the better it's going to be. I kind of see this, and I need to talk to Ryan about this too, Clay. We need to chat about it, but I kind of see the writer's job, the colorist's job, and to a certain extent the inker's job, and the letterer's job as all supporting functions of that visual art. We are there to make the artist look as good as possible, and by extension, we will look good, because a lot of what inkers, I think, are extremely unsung, because there are storytelling parts that an inker brings to it, foregrounding and backgrounding, and the way inkers differentiate the art and make it look great. Colorists do the same thing. A letterer can do the same thing but we're doing it invisibly. Whereas, the artist is ultimately they're the lead singer, all right? We're just the other guys in the band.
The accountants.
Yeah. But when, I'll try to do my best to limit, single actions to a panel. I'll try to say, okay, well, if I'm breaking down this scene, how many pages should it be? And I probably come at this backwards, and I know I've got 22 or 23 pages, 24, because I always want to try to give the reader more, and I'm trying to standardize, but, what needs to happen? And then I break those down into the various, scenes and pages and number of panels, using, a rule of thumb is like 4 or 5 panels per page, or 6, somewhere in that range. And that's a really mechanical process for me when I'm doing it. This is how many total panels I have, break down the scenes. The real writing for me comes in, and it's not really the dialogue, and it probably should be. I need to work on my dialogue. But it comes in trying to think up visually interesting ways for the artist to bring the artist into the story.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense, or am I just blathering at this point?
I completely get it. That's thank you both so much. It's not only has been really insightful, it's been a great amount of fun actually discussing this.
Can I add to my last answer? Can I just add something off of something that Will just said?
Yeah.
Oh no, it's too late. I got last word. You can't make me look bad.
Damn it. No. I wanted to say, like, going back to this question of like the give and take. I don't want to give the impression, that I'm a pushover, but I think that, I think 95% of the director's job, right, on a film is casting. Like if you cast a project right, your job is not so hard. And I feel like it's the same with comics. Like if you find the right collaborators, then the difficult discussions are fewer and farther between. It's always hard when you're starting out, to find those collaborators. You do have to kind of date a little bit. But once you do, and you find those people that you have that chemistry with, then it gets. Of course, there are going to be difficult conversations, like in any marriage. But if it's a good one, you can work through those issues. But you're complementing each other in great ways too.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel it's as much the artist's story as it is the writer's story. And I really like the analogy about it's a long letter to the artist, and then the artist can completely disregard it if they leave.
Well, that Neil Gaiman guy, he might be going somewhere one day. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he'll do all right, that kid.
Look out for it.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. Clay, Will, where are the best places that people can find out about you?
Yeah, so you can find me, my work at friedcomics.com. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/friedcomics. You can find us on Twitter at friedcomics. I'm on Twitter at Clay's Evil Twin. And you can get 4 free first issues at friedcomics.com/free.
Perfect. Will, what's the best place for people to find out more about you and your projects?
I'm on Twitter at Wallred. That's the word wall and the color red, because I'm apparently not very creative when it comes to picking usernames. I also have willallred.com, and then let's see, diaryofnight.com is where I've got some pre-Kickstarter stuff going on. But yeah, that's probably the best place to find me.
Perfect. I'll put links to all of that in the blog post below. Guys, are you happy to come back on again if we get, well, hopefully we'll get more reader questions.
Yeah, anytime.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Anytime.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do follow me at FarhanQ_UK on Twitter, and obviously comic.digitopia.film.com, which I expect you're probably on or watching this video, but in case you're watching on YouTube, and that's the place to go. Okay. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.